I thought this chapter was about a dream car. It turns out to be about a moment that changed my life forever. Dream cars, wild seas, and the day everything changed. After months of waiting while the restoration finished, my new love rolled out. A 1961 Austin Healey 3-litre Mark II in Old English white with fresh red leather. I'd asked the shop to respray it and redo the interior, and I'd read a classic car feature on big Healeys every single day of a 4-month trip on the main express. I was like a child every day on Christmas Eve, counting down to Christmas. I joined that ship in San Francisco, 3 days in a luxury hotel to acclimatise, as was the way back then, and the anticipation of coming home to the Healey hummed in the background the whole time. San Francisco was already a favourite. I'd been there on the Memnon. Great views from Alcatraz, intimate streets. It's a real human scale city. Our route, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Hong Kong, and then Kaohsiung in Taiwan, and back again. We skirted the North Pole on a great circle route running near the Aleutians. The North Pacific sounds nice, maybe. It isn't. Very few ships, bitter cold, proper weather. We were so bored we'd log birds and fish on our 4-hourly Met reports that fed the world's forecast back in the day. Much cruder than the satellites and supercomputers that we have today. We had a good crowd on board, a good captain, Joe Walsh. 4 happy months. Hong Kong was electric. When you're on watch, there's no time to admire the skyline. It's busy, 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 shipping everywhere. Off watch, we'd cross over on the Star Ferry into the nightlife with a palpable undercurrent of energy. One night, my friend Simon and I, somehow, I can't remember the details, we took over a disco and we were running it in this club. And we came back to the ship literally dancing on the tables to Irene Cara's Flash Dance. But right into the early hours. And then we took time and sobered up, ready for the 8 to 12. Back home again, the big Healey did not disappoint. She looked sublime and she sounded ferocious, partly because the air filters for the twin 2.5-inch SU carburettors hadn't arrived. I insisted on taking the car anyway, risk of grip be damned. Love rarely waits for sensible, and the Healey, like many loves, was gloriously impractical. The seat was punishing, the wipers were pathetic, the headlamps were like two candles in a storm, and the hood, which you had to build, was a DIY affair, ate up the whole boot and took about 5 minutes with practice to get up and down. Not great if it's pouring with rain. Oh, and in rain it steamed up, and in the heat it baked you. And in fact, at speed, the passengers' shoes were in danger of melting to the floor. So close did the exhaust run underneath the floor. And the whole car ran so close to the ground, you ground out on everything. And these were the years before speed bumps were invented. You were just constantly... Yet hood down, Don Henley, The Boys of Summer, blaring away on repeat. That car was bloody perfect. Not long after, my cousin Andrew and I headed to my parents' apartment in Aquadolfi in Spain. Andrew was a skilled mechanic and as mad about cars as I was. Our hire car was a battered Fiat 128, had a failing gearbox, a dying clutch, and demanded double declutches on every shift. The apartment was perched high on a mountain road, crumbling and twisting, single track with the occasional passing place. We raced down, timing ourselves in turns. On one run down, the gear lever came off in my hand. We laughed it off. Later, we coaxed into life an abandoned car that had come with the apartment. From memory, it was a Fiat 126, the square one, not the pretty round one. Andrew knew how to hotwire a car, not from just from building cars himself, not from a career stealing them. We coaxed this thing into life, and then we went down into town, 4 or 5 miles down the mountain, and we topped up the fluids in the garage. As we were driving gingerly back, we came to the first set of traffic lights, at which point we sailed through because the brakes failed completely. Slightly terrified, but laughing to cover it up, as you do. We were thinking, had that happened on the descent down from the mountain, neither of us would be here. We went back up very gingerly, parked it up. It's probably still there today. We abandoned it back to where it had come from. The holiday was full of such escapades. We climbed the outside of this block, hanging over these cliffs, several hundreds of feet up from the beach, because we'd locked ourselves out, just daring ourselves into trouble like young men can do. We both shared a sense of mischief and an outlook that even now when we meet, is still a bloody danger together. The Healy came into its own on long drives. One trip to see my sister in Poole stands out. It became a 9-hour ordeal on the incomplete M25. I remember I was at Roadworks. I was running alongside a TR5, both with the hoods down. It was a lovely day. I turned to him and I said, "How's your temperature?" He said, I'm in the red. I don't think it'll last much longer. And sure enough, he broke down a little way down the road. My car was a little bit cooler and I kept going and going and going until we came to some roadworks and the road went down to one lane, no hard shoulder. That was when the Healy chose to stop. And it stayed stopped for about 15 minutes whilst I waited until I could touch the radiator cap, poured in the spare water that luckily I had with me, and got going again, and the whole M25 was backed up behind me with nowhere to go. I was 20, pretty embarrassed. I carried on, already late. I didn't want to stop and ring my sister and tell her I was running late because that meant diverting to find a phone box, etc., etc. I got there very, very late, 3 hours, half crippled by the Healy seat. And my sister, of course, shouted at me for not calling and because she'd been worried about me. That trip took me to Sherborne to see my grandmother, Henrietta. She was formidable, capable. I wish I'd asked her more about her and my grandfather's lives. My grandfather was born in 1897. He flew in both World Wars. In World War I, he was one of the 20 minuters, which was the average life expectancy of new pilots. Everyone he started with when he joined his squadron was killed. And then all the replacements that came out were killed. He was surviving, but scarred. He kept himself to himself after that, for fear of breaking if he lost more friends. It's really hard to imagine that level of stress. And of course, in those days, if you showed stress and couldn't fight anymore, you stood a good chance of being lined up against a wall and shot. I remember one story. He talked very little about it, but he had an engine failure. He said the engine failed. It was a common occurrence back then. In fact, the planes killed more people than the enemy did. So he had to land very quickly. There was only a very small field, so he landed in this field, aimed between two trees. The wings came off, but the plane stopped. And he said to me, Mark, the sign of a good landing, if you can land and walk away, that's a good landing. If you can land and walk away and you can use the plane again, that's a really good landing. My grandfather rose high. He became a base commander in World War II. And although technically not meant to fly because he was of an age and base commander, he couldn't bear to send his boys up at night with sitting there staying safe himself. So he flew. The attrition rates were horrendous. 10% didn't come home from most missions. 10%. Imagine they had 30 missions to a tour. Again, he rarely spoke of it, but his medals and his silence told a story. His cousin was Bomber Harris, Air Chief Marshal Sir Arthur Harris. They fly fished together in Scotland. Trying to outrun the ghosts, I expect. From Stringbads to Concorde and landed on the moon. He saw more change in aviation than perhaps anyone could imagine. He lived later in a haunted priest's house in Much Elney. It was seriously haunted. Ghosts never bothered him. I was terrified. I've always been able to sense and see ghosts. I was born without a sense of smell, and perhaps that extra sense sort of balanced it up. I've told myself that anyway. Grandad often saw a young lady ghost. He described her to the long retired vicar, including the clothes that she was wearing. They were the clothes she died in the end bedroom of the house. Anyway, I had to pass this bedroom. So you'd sit by this big inglenook downstairs, and to get to the toilet, you went through a dining room, up a tiny little staircase, through a big hallway, which was used to be a sort of a grand hall. And then you went past one bedroom, then past the ladies' bedroom, and then finally at the end of the house was the toilet. I used to sit there nearly wetting myself until somebody else said they were going to the toilet, because there was no way I was going up there on my own. You could feel this energy there. Back at sea, I was enjoying single life. And I met Emma, a fellow midshipman on the Moreton Bay. She was a couple of years behind me, sensible, strong-minded, Lovely girl. Really just a really, not pretty lovely, she was pretty, but just a lovely human. To my surprise, she liked me back. And we became close. And so we were going out, boyfriend and girlfriend. And then I think 2 trips later, I was on the Osaka Bay. I was on watch, in fact, in the Med when a VHF call came through from Portishead Radio. Now, back in those days, if someone was calling you on the VHF, we had no SATCOM, it was all did, and VHF link calls. Mostly if someone's calling you, it's because someone's died. So, not a good thing to get a call. The call was for me. And it was Emma's mum. And she told me I was the proud father of a baby girl, Amy. I had no idea, and nor did her parents, incidentally, that Emma was pregnant. The shock swallowed me whole. I didn't eat for 3 days. I really was in clinical shock. The company flew me home, and suddenly my life changed. Emma and I set up in a small semi on a 70s estate, a house I'd never meant to live in. I bought it as a rental in the days when that was possible for youngsters, and I was on a good salary. We married quietly in a registry office. The reception was at her parents'. I barely remember it. The thing I do remember was the surprise helicopter pickup. My dad had arranged to whisk us to Norwich Airport, onto his then plane, and fly on to Luxembourg for a 3-day rainy honeymoon. It was a fantastic experience. I love flying in helicopters. Fatherhood demanded sacrifice. The Healy had to go. Sold at a small profit, rare for me. It was replaced by extremely dull Fiat Regatta, and later a TR7 convertible as I tried to cling to my boyhood, my freedom. Emma and I moved into a beautiful cottage in Taysborough, all beams and brick, built in 1556 or something like that. It's a properly old cottage, beautiful. There's a stream across the back garden. The garden itself was fantastically planted. It was more than a stretch to get it. I sold everything I could sell. I borrowed up to the maximum on my credit cards. And we had a contract race because the chap was moving to Cyprus. I said to the solicitor, you do your part, tell me what I can do. He said, well, you can do the searches. So I went to the council officers, no idea what I was doing really. Picked up all the searches, and we exchanged and completed in 2 weeks, which with the British system is very, very rare. And we got this house. And a very rusty old Mini was the only form of transport for £250 that we could afford, having sold everything else to put towards it. It was a new chapter. Not one I had imagined in my life. Life lessons. Dreams carry us forward, but life has a way of surprising us. Passion, freedom, and adventure matter, yet responsibility sometimes calls us to let go of what we love. And true resilience lies in adapting without losing the spark that makes us who we are.